All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Roderick Jackson. I'm the Director of IT at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. And this is Harold Beaver, my Systems Administrator. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to just go over our experience of moving from Exchange to Google Apps. All right, obvious question, why are we doing it? Answer is clear. Everybody's budget is getting destroyed at this point in time due to the economy, and ours is no exception. We currently have well, on paper it's a 4-person department, but currently we have 3 people in my department, myself included. Harold and I have a web administrator, and he does most of our programming. But obviously, you know, we're the first thing that usually gets cut in schools is IT resources, so we have to make do with what we have. So we were challenged with getting a different mail solution than Exchange. I spec'd out a server for us to purchase to go to 2007. It got shut down just as soon as I turned it in, so they said, find another solution. And it's kind of awkward because we were just here when I first started in 2005 there. And a little bit of background, both Harold and I are from larger universities. We work with larger establishments, and there's a good, we've talked about good and bad being a smaller department, not having to deal with all the bureaucracy and red tape to get things approved. So we've seen both sides of the coin. But when I started in 2005, we started, our website was hosted, our mail was hosted on the website, the web server company. So when the new dean joined us in 2006 or 7.
So you actually right before.
Yeah, in 2007, when the new dean joined us, he wanted he wanted us to bring email in-house because he wanted a little bit more control over it. He wanted us to essentially have email for life for students once they complete their degree requirements. They have an email past being a student. So that was one of the reasons that he wants to bring it in-house, one of the main reasons. But essentially, when we were tasked to move from Exchange to a different solution, we had to do analysis, cost analysis, and all that kind of thing. So we chose Google Apps. We considered Microsoft Live, and we veered to Google Apps due to the amount of educational institutes that are already on Google Apps. And we did our research and read through all of their success stories and what they had available. So we went to the Google Apps. Now, us moving to Google Apps, it saved approximately about 30% of our annual costs for licensing, software, hardware, the whole 9 yards. So that was an immediate benefit. And it eliminated at least 2 to 3 servers that we had that serve our Exchange front end, back end, and the backup component. And of course, as I mentioned, the Email for Life program, which the dean wanted to implement for all students. So those were the reasons that we moved from Exchange to Google Apps. All right, who's moving? Essentially everybody on campus. We have faculty, adjuncts, staff, students, and alumni. We have about, how many years of alumni? We have 3 years of alumni that we migrated from Exchange to Google Apps, and roughly about 500 to 600 students, part-time and full-time, and about plus or minus 100 plus faculty and staff. And so that actually helped us a lot as far as licensing and moving away from the licensing structure. And as of June, we did a calculation today. We have about 1,300 mailboxes on Google Apps. All right, security and privacy concerns, you want to talk about
that? Security and privacy concerns, it really was brought up. The students didn't care, okay? Because most students have a Gmail account. So when we were we're moving to Gmail, their question was, okay, well, how can I merge my personal Gmail account with my John Marshall account? So they were easy. Faculty brought it up. We had one faculty member who asked about the last breach with Google Apps, which was the Facebook breach. And the breach was not a Google Apps issue. It was a person issue. The president of Facebook, his secretary, her password was like her last name or her first name. So it wasn't really a true hack. And that was like 2.5 years ago. So the security is there. You know, their uptime is much better than what we would be willing to offer at the law school. Their uptime is listed at 99.25% for the education account. But the education account is the same as the premier account, but the premier account you pay for it and they give you a 99.95%. So it's there. And the security, if people just change their passwords other than their last name or their birth date or kid's name or something like that, the security has been really strong in Google Apps from the get-go. Privacy concerns, you know, there's always been the discussion of discovery of your mail and things of that nature. With the education, you get to knock out the advertisements and the web clips, so it's not really doing any of your research. We have, you know, for disclosure, they have to come to the school and make a request. We need to be able to give this information to the party who's requesting it by subpoena, and the school has the last option to fight. So it's not like, you know, somebody shows up at Google's door with a subpoena and says, we want to see all John Marshall's email, and they just say, okay, go ahead. We have the last right of refusal for it. So it is actually more secure than most people think it is.
All right, when did the transition take place from students? He actually did the initial migration of students.
Yeah, and actually, did you take it off that slide? Which one? There should be another. Oh, there's not another line. Okay, oh, there it is. 4 p.m. Sunday, March 7th, which was the week of spring break for us. We sent out all the information prior to spring break starting, told students that Sunday night, I'm migrating all your mail. Monday morning, you log into Google Apps, you don't log into Exchange anymore. It took 7.5 hours to migrate 588 students. That's because we had a 100 meg quota for students. Most students, you know, that's not a lot for students, so they were already pulling mail off the server to begin with. So it wasn't a lot of mail to move. You know, the issue that you have is you're dealing with students. So Monday morning, although most of them were on spring break wherever, the phone started ringing because none of them kept the email that we sent on Friday that said, hey, don't forget, Monday, everything moves, don't forget, username is the same, we just changed their password to their birthday because it was easy for me to pull from the system. I didn't have to try and go find out what their passwords were. So,
I would like to say for the record, we chose not to push the fire alarm.
Appreciate that.
So, but like I said, 7.5 hours Monday. Once we got past the point of the amount of students who didn't, you know, write down their password or any of that information, it was fine. Basically, what we did was we put up a website that they had to log into with their local credentials off of our Active Directory and grab their new passwords, and they had to change their password the first time they logged in.
When you moved their mail, did you also move like contact information and calendar?
If they had contacts. For the most part, students didn't have contacts. We sent it out initially. We'll get into the migration tools later. The first migration tool was actually built into the dashboard, and it is actually more limited. So you had to do contacts and calendars separate. So we sent out an email to all the students early and said, if you have this, let us know. We'll be glad to migrate it for you. I had 2 students out of 588 accounts. So they don't really use it for that. But we did migrate those 2 that asked. Now the newer migration tool that's put out by Google, but it's kind of an add-on, you drop it onto a desktop. I can move deleted mail, junk mail, calendars, contacts, there's something else.
But
tasks, and all that at one shot. So we do that now with the staff and faculty. But we ask them, do you want us to transfer your junk mail and your deleted mail? Most of them don't want it, but we give them the option because you do have a certain amount of faculty members who keep their deleted mail for the dean. Every 2 months or so, I go in and archive his mail in exchange. I archive his deleted mail to a PST file, which is dated and all that stuff. So he has every deleted message since he's been at John Marshall. You know, but he's the dean. He can do what he wants.
Yes.
Okay, so Monday morning, all students were on.
So actually, it's an ongoing process. I would say we're 90% done.
I think we have 6 6 faculty members.
We have about 6 faculty
Faculty
members.
only,
left.
all staff are done.
Yeah.
And
And one thing that you want to do is, of course, and we'll get a little bit more into it, is, of course, give as much notice as you can to your audience, which are students, faculty, and staff. And we'll get a little bit into it a little bit later about what we did specifically to do that. But
with the faculty members, we were able to force staff members, because staff members, we all work all through the summer. So they were there. But faculty members are not required back on campus until the week prior to orientation, which is, I think, the August
First week
1st or
of
something
August.
of that nature. So we can't force them yet. But everybody who's been on campus, all the faculty members who've been on campus, we've gone ahead and migrated them. And basically we just set out and say, hey, who wants to be migrated? If I have 10 people, then I may do 5 tonight, 5 tomorrow night, just so I don't have to manage a large.
What form did the email address take?
It's the same address.
And so does it have the law school name in it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's your own domain.
Okay.
So when you request it, you actually get 2. And if anybody who owns a current Gmail account, you have 2 email addresses. Okay, you have gmail.com and you have, I think it's googlemail.com, because when Gmail was created, they couldn't have the gmail.com address in Europe. So they gave you both addresses. Little trick for spam.
Did you
filter.
keep that across faculty, staff, and students?
Yeah, the only thing that happened is they changed the website that they log in. So basically what happens is when I migrated an account, once the migration is done, I delete the account in Exchange, and anything that at Roger had johnmarshall.edu directed to his Gmail account.
They had 100 megabytes. Did that go up?
Oh yeah, your Gmail account,
It's like 7
Seven.
gigs.
7.4 gig, you get whatever
Same as
email
the
you
regular
get.
Gmail account.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
yes, sir.
Are you handling authentication? Are you doing that at the Gmail level or passive authentication back here? I don't have to 8
We're handling at the Gmail level.
Yeah. And we'll get more into that.
Yeah, we'll talk about the difference of creating accounts versus syncing your Active Directory.
But
and why
why
we
go
did.
in, Harold, and reset their password,
What's that?
and they all have to go in the initial.
Yeah, what I did was when I created the accounts, in the script that I did, the accounts, I checked that they have to change their password first time they log in. And you'd be surprised how many would change their password and couldn't remember what they changed it to.
All right, we're going to get in the actual process of what you do to get Google Apps. First, you have to request it, and we'll have this available on the CALI site afterwards, and we have a couple of links that are useful. But essentially, you have to request the account. They have a list of things that you have to do in order to activate and everything, but you pretty much just follow the instructions. Now, this test domain, the way they term it, initially and the way that it's used later is kind of contradictory, but it's a good idea to do this as well, and it's listed in the instructions, and we'll get more into that as we get further down in the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, you might as well just pull them up. Okay, ways to create your accounts. You can, sync your directory structure to Gmail. Okay, so your Active Directory or your LDAP. We use Active Directory, obviously, since it's an Exchange server. But when we got reading into it, we realized that I don't want to control Active Directory accounts for students who graduated 6 years ago. It's more nuisance than I really care about. So with the Active Directory sync, if I remove somebody from Active Directory and I don't put them in the exclusion list, their Gmail account goes away the next sync. Okay, so I said, you know what? I have all their accounts anyway. I just pulled it out of Active Directory, stuck it in a CSV file, and uploaded them all. At one shot, I uploaded, I think, 1,100 accounts, which was all our alumni, staff, faculty, and students. So to me, I could sync Active Directory, but I don't really care. We haven't really decided if we're staying with Active Directory after Exchange is gone. What we'll do with LDAP, that'll be something that we go back with. But the CSV file was really simple. It's a 4-column spreadsheet: first name, last name, username, and password. That's all you need. And you can just create their accounts that way.
And so it's not to recreate the wheel. You can just do directory exports using LDIP and things like that.
CSVD, whatever you prefer to use. The Google API provisioning, you can, guys that sit in script all the time or understand a lot of the other programming languages. You can go through the API and there's a ton of steps that you can add into it and create your accounts with more information than you ever need.
Yeah, we'll talk about delivery. So the initial, after you go through the motions and set everything up, the initial thing that you have to do is set up either, and it depends really on who you want to migrate. There's dual delivery and split delivery. Dual delivery is delivering to both the pre-production Google Apps site for you, delivery there into your existing Exchange server. This is so that during the migration, no mail is lost. And the control panel for Google certain parts of it are very granular. You can tell it, you can do a catch-all, or you can just move everything to one location, or you can move it to a specific mailbox. If messages that, during the migration, if messages come in and the recipient mailbox isn't created, it'll hold it in that container mailbox. So it's pretty easy to use. But what we opted for, and let me go back. The split delivery is for if you want to migrate just certain users. Say, for instance, you just want students on Google Apps and then leave everybody else on Exchange. There's a split delivery setup. And we chose to do dual delivery because, obviously they're pushing us off Exchange. We have no choice, which is fine. That's one less server for us to deal with. So we did the dual delivery, and it's actually currently still set up in that configuration. And as we mentioned, the last people that we have to do are 6 faculty members and a few alumni accounts, and then we're done with Exchange. But the migration process is slow and it's drawn out, and it's just to make sure that we've covered all our bases. All right. And this is a graphic, it's kind of blurry, but this is a graphic that kind of just describes the dual delivery system. So you have, and let me back up a little bit. So in order to activate the dual delivery, essentially what you're doing is the test domain that you set up, you're setting that up as an MX record. And what happens is you have two MX records on the internet. Your current Exchange MX record and then the new Google Apps one. So essentially mail hits either the two of those MX records, and based on, and if your understanding of MX records and DNS and the priorities, we kind of found that out the hard way. Priority 10, 20 is kind of useless. It pretty much is random. So essentially, if you have a priority 10 for your Exchange and a 20 for Google Apps, that really doesn't matter. And we found that out the hard way. We did the priorities and didn't have both on at the same time, and then all the mail went there. And it was pretty much random. Most of the mail went there. Some of it went to our Exchange server. We had to correct that. But so essentially, you have 2 sets of records. You have your Exchange records and your Google Apps records. Whichever one hits Google first, what Google will do is forward. It will hit the corresponding mailbox that's on Google. So say, for instance, it'll hit Harold's mailbox. Google, in turn, would forward it to Exchange. Now, if it hits Exchange first, that's fine. It just hits Exchange. It doesn't go to Google. And the existing users will get their email. But in the instance that it hits Google Apps first, you'll go to Google Apps and then forward it to your existing Exchange server. All right, so that was the Google side of it, which is pretty easy, the configuration. Now comes the nightmare. And if you guys are familiar with Exchange and it's idiosyncratic, it's just a headache at some times. But they have a couple of, and if you're familiar with Q articles, the knowledge-based articles, you have to take those with a grain of salt and, just trying to read through them and make sure that you understand the way things are laid out in the article themselves before you go testing it. And it's, if you have a test environment to do things in first, that's what's recommended. But if you don't, just go through the Q articles kind of slowly. But essentially, Microsoft Exchange has something called shared namespace. Now, essentially what that is 2 servers having the exact same namespace, which is, in our case, is @johnmarshall.edu. So essentially we had, or what the Q article says is you have your Exchange as the authoritative and then Google Apps as the non-authoritative. And it can work both ways. Usually Exchange, being Exchange, it thinks it's the authoritative all the time. So we left it in that model. Let's see. So that's the shared namespace. We had to modify, or the other articles refer to modifying the recipient policy. And most of you are familiar with that. That pretty much tells the system where to deliver everything. So Exchange was if Exchange is the non-authoritative, meaning if it's the submissive one, and a message arrives, it checks the SMTP connector, and if it doesn't exist in Exchange, or if it can't find an authoritative, then you get a not delivery message in this code. If Exchange is authoritative and it can't find it, it gives you that code. So essentially, we had to find a workaround to eliminate the NDRs and allow the mail to go through. All right, first method, we had to modify the recipient policy to share the namespace with Google, which I mentioned. That's one method you can use. Or you can modify the recipient policy to redirect the mail to Google Apps. We kind of didn't use either of the two of these. We kind of customized our own solution. And here's what we did. All right, we configured, and most of this information is located in the Microsoft knowledge base. We configured our SMTP server to forward messages that weren't in Exchange to Google Apps. So say, for instance, he migrated a mailbox. We remove it. A message comes to Exchange. That mailbox doesn't exist. The SMTP server would check the Active Directory structure to see if that mailbox was there. If it wasn't, the SMTP server would forward it to Google Apps. Now, if your configuration is off, you can create mail loops, and we had to kind of work around that. But if you do this and configure Google Apps, you won't necessarily have mail loops. So we did that first, and then we created contacts, and this is kind of the painful part. When you have, say for instance, we migrate all the students, and faculty and staff are still on Exchange. In order for, if you send natively, if you don't touch anything, if you send to a student, it will try to send to the student at johnmarshall.edu. It'll hit the SMTP connector, notice it's not in the domain, and then forward to Google Apps, and that's where we experience mail loops. But even though the student's mailbox didn't exist on the Exchange server, it existed in Google Apps, but Google Apps would then pass it back to Exchange. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So what we did was created the subdomain g.johnmarshall.edu, and we attached those to the contacts. So if someone on Exchange sent to a student, it would send to the subdomain. The subdomain would be forwarded to Google Apps, and the student would receive it. And this is another painful thing that we had to do. So say, for instance, a student sends information to the registrar who is on Exchange. The registrar replies, but the registrar's reply is to the reference that was on the Exchange server. So they try to send back to that student. Outlook is reading the cache on the local machine, referencing the Exchange server. So they send it, and naturally it comes back. What we did was did a simple registry hack and pushed it out through group policy to get rid of the Outlook cache. So essentially, when someone logs off and logs back on, all of the memory of who they sent to is gone. And of course, they complained about it, but that was our only work.
You're talking about the autocomplete list?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's
once it's in the cache, and the way we found it is when we got, oh my God, I tried to reply to a student who sent me a message 3 weeks prior to them moving to Google. I get this return message, and we're like, I know their account exists because I just sent him a message and it works fine. send me the error message. Well, in the error message is where you actually see that it has the qualified domain name of the Exchange server. It tells you that it's looking in the first admin server, blah, blah, blah. So then we're like, aha, the cache is actually keeping the true server's name, not just that it's johnmarshall.edu, but as you see, received from mars.johnmarshall.edu, that's the front end of the webmail server. So it actually keeps that true server name. It doesn't just go to johnmarshall.edu. Outlook actually caches that information. So that's why we had to whack that cache.
Yes.
Stanford just put all their students on Google May 23rd. We didn't have that problem. Faculty staff are still on Exchange 2007, and they didn't have to clear everybody's.
How'd you separate?
Plus we're on
Sometimes
2003.
I have no
cache is
idea.
turned on and sometimes it's not. And it's like, I know on our desktops, we don't have it turned on, but we do on the laptops because they're traveling.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, we've got all kinds of stuff. We've got some cache, some not. Everybody's using the NK2 files. So I'm not sure how they got around that problem, but they didn't go through and delete all of our. I mean, we don't use GPOs for much of anything. So, just an FYI.
It'd be interesting.
There may be another
It'd
workaround
be
for
interesting to
that.
find out. Because like I said, that was the quickest, easiest for us. It was, like I said, we found, we tracked out what the issue was, and we're like, let's do the Outlook cache.
And it may be a 2007, 2003 issue. I'm not sure. It could be.
The students were on 2003, faculty staff were on 2007.
Separate servers?
Yeah.
That's
Separate
That's,
servers.
yeah,
That's what
that's
it costs.
servers.
Yeah,
If
the
it's separate
students were on
servers,
different
server
mail
name
server.
would
Okay.
have, server name would have made the difference.
Do
They're
they
on
have
the
like,
same server.
is it students dot?
So it was all Stanford.edu, but
Okay. I didn't know
there
if
was a
they had
student mail
it.
store and a faculty staff mail store. And we all, once upon a time, were all in 2003, obviously. And then the faculty staff moved to 07.
Okay.
And they never moved the students because they were looking at this.
Gotcha.
So,
Do you have any problems not just with the autocomplete, but with like contacts saved with that fully qualified address in it? Or was it just with the?
I think it was just with the save because the contacts are just truly a name. And that was the other issue that we had. Like I said, what was the one we just had with Michelle?
It was this one.
Oh, because that was with the groups.
Yeah, that was.
The other place that we ran into a similar issue was with distribution lists. A distribution list in Exchange that we converted to a Google group. So it just depended on, we had a staff member who was on Google and a faculty member who was not moved yet. And when she responded to his message, because he was still on Exchange, his message, the header, had the mars.johnmarshall. She was not allowed to send to it because she was no longer an account on the Exchange server. So we just ditched all the distribution lists, made them contacts, and everything's on Google. Okay, we already sort of talked about these. The migration tools, the control panel migration tool, it's pretty basic. You can migrate one individual user, or you can do it by a CSV file. The one thing that we did when I used this for students, the control panel migration. I just created an admin user in Exchange, and we named him Migration, and we gave him a simple password of migrator, and I used ones and zeros for his name. And in the script, you can tell it that if you use this admin account, I don't have to have the student's password. All I have to have is their correct username. So it was really a quick, easy script to put together, make it a CSV file, and just run it. And like I said, the migration worked fine, but again, it was very limited. It was really just their mail that was being migrated. It was not contacts, calendars. The Google Apps migration utility, which you can just download from their site, is one of their many tools that they have out there now. It's it's a small app that runs on your desktop, and because I'm an admin user, I just set it to use my account. And the only thing that I have to have is I have one file that has the correct username of every user that I migrate. So if I do, if I put R. Jackson in it and I run the migration utility, it says, oh, he has an account, I'm going to migrate. And then I can tell it what date to go back and start migration or just migrate everything. I could run a migration on him today, and it would if his exchange account existed, it would check and see if there was anything new that needed to be moved. So it's actually a much better tool, and like I said, I can move contacts, calendar, email, deleted mail, junk mail, and tasks. So, and then there are other options in it that you can select it and get even granular, more granular. Don't transfer anything from Rutgers.edu. So it's a great tool, a much better tool. I wish that it was out when I did the students, but the students' accounts were, like I said, they were very small, and none of them had contacts and calendars. The two that did, there was just an additional utility that they had in the dashboard that would move their calendars and contacts.
And another thing, essentially, all Google is constantly coding, constantly coming up with these utilities. So the majority of the stuff that we're talking about today, we checked against what currently exists with Google. Some of it, not very much of it, is out of date, but they're constantly developing these utilities to assist in migration and maintaining. And yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Before we go into this, I'll touch a little bit on the Active Directory or the directory sync tool. If you have a larger directory structure, it will be a good idea, but of course, make sure that it's not set to delete once you remove an Active Directory account. It manages group permissions and things of that nature, so you can transfer your groups, transfer your users already in the groups. Since we don't use that many groups, we've just elected to use it in the CSV format. But if you do have a larger directory structure, I would recommend using it. But this
Okay, how many people have gone through a mail change from anything to anything else? How many of you given training to students? Okay, how many students show up?
Not many.
Yeah, not many. I did 9 training sessions, 1 hour apiece. I had 2 students, okay? And the answer was, oh, I have a Gmail account, And I had one girl that came to my session, she's like, I've had a Gmail account since right after they came. Only person in the school that I know of that has an original Gmail account older than mine. And I was like, okay, let's just walk through it. An hour later, her eyes were like this big. She's like, I didn't know that the documents did this. I didn't know that this happened. And I didn't understand how this worked, or how I can forward mail, or how I can bring in other accounts. I'm like, that's why I give this 1 hour training session. So then, you release it and students start logging in, and the first person who knocks on your door says, I'm not sure how to set up my phone. And it's like, oh, did you come to my training? Oh, no, you didn't. There's a help file on the website. Go look through it. If you can't fix it after that, I'll help you out.
Call the help desk.
Yeah, the great thing for the training and information and documentation from Google, it's all there, and it's all Google's documentation. All you have to do is pull it down. You can pull it down as a template, and all the text is in red that you need to change. So it says, your company in red, johnmarshall.edu. That's all I had to do, copy it, paste it, we dumped it on the website. It's all there. It's all their information. And it tells you if you're not going to give them access to sites, which we don't give them sites because it's not granular enough for us to not allow students to create sites. Okay, so we just go in there and you take that whole block of text out, the document's done. So everything is there. You can step in, it does, it's got all the information for how to set up your BlackBerry, your iPhone, or your Windows phone. What it says for the Droid is it's a Google device. Click the Gmail icon, put in your full email address and your password, and you're done. So the Droid is much easier because it is theirs. But everything is there step by step. And I tell them all, the students like, well, did you read through the document? Nah, well, read the document. You can go sit right in the lab across from my office, read the document. If you have a problem, then I'll help you out. And most of them just, okay. And then I don't hear from them again because they actually read the document. But everything that they gave us, to be able to create the training information or the online documentation or the little posters that we hung up saying that, Google Apps is coming. It had all their logos, like the logo that's in the background of this, that's right off of their site. They tell you what you can do with their logos, how to use them, which logos to use. So, they provide you all the tools to get the information out there.
In fact of the matter is, I mean, the documentation is a time saver for us. He and I do the majority of the support for the law school, and we don't really have time to set up 500 plus phones. So, and that's why we divert them to the documentation, and they receive that well. Essentially, Exchange and Google Apps, functionally wise, do the same thing. You have your Exchange distribution list, Google Apps has groups. What else?
In Exchange, you have an individual email message for every message that comes through, even if it's a conversation between Chris and I. They're all individual messages. If we're on Google, it becomes one conversation. Okay, that was like one of those concepts that people could look at you like, why would you want to do that? I'm like, well, because if you and I are having a discussion over 3 months, it's all in one message. I can go back to the first message. And then the great thing is that I need to bring Roger in on it. I just forward the entire message to him. He's got all 3 months worth of information. I don't have to go through and track down the emails that I received from Chris and then the sent mails and try and patch them together and give them to him. It's all one conversation.
Exchange 2010 does that now.
Oh, does it? 2010, that's so 2010, come on.
Didn't we
Have anything that new we're trying to get?
You can even get outside.
Yeah, we're trying to.
The Office, Outlook 2010 does it.
Yeah, we're still trying to get off of XP. So.
Well, XP works.
Yes, that's the But that was actually one of the complaints, the nesting of the messages. And you can't please everybody. The fact of the matter was we were told to find something else. This is the best solution for our institution. So,
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's just a mail server. So you can point your Outlook client at your Gmail account. You can point Thunderbird or MacMail or Pegasus, or if you have Pine and you want to use that, you can point it at their server. And this was something that we talked about. Something we talked about with faculty members, and the first was like, I don't like the web client. I use Outlook. I don't care what you use, just email. But the other features that come with Google Apps, to me, made it really worth it. The shared calendaring, the documents. I mean, Roger and I worked on this document and all of our migration documentation. It's all in Google Docs. We can log into it at the same time and work at the same time. I don't have to close it down and save it and then tell him that, the most recent changes there. He sees it live. Go ahead.
How'd you do with the Google addresses?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The gal.
we'll get into that in just a second. Of course, Google, the web client, does have a global address list. Global, what they call it, contacts list. Shared contacts, central shared contacts. But we'll get into that in just a second. Yes, ma'am.
What about public folders? Did you all use those much?
Yeah, we had a ton. And all we did was we said, look, public folders, we're just going to move them to a group. So we named the group, whatever the public folder was, which gives it the same address. So like orientation was one of our folders. So now orientation at johnmarshall.edu, we send the documents to that. The only people that can post to it are managers. Students can read it, and they can go back and read the archives. So where we found that the best part was with faculty. Because when faculty do stuff, we get faculty more often than we get new students. But when a faculty member comes in, the secretaries have to remember, I have to send him the dress code, this, all these other pieces of information. And she just points them at the faculty group, and all that documentation is already there.
And essentially, Exchange, I think they stopped doing public folders in 2007.
No,
Or they
no, wide enough to make up the.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
And it's in 2010 as well, so.
Okay.
But so with the groups though, maybe I'm not understanding how the groups work, but anyone can see those folders if you give everyone rights to see those.
If you give them rights to see it.
Okay.
So I can tell for a particular group, I can set it that only members can see the information, or I can set it so that everybody in the domain can see it.
Okay.
You can also allow it to be seen by other people outside of your domain, because you can actually have outside addresses in your groups.
Can you, how would that look for the user when they log into Gmail?
Right now we have it sending their mail, so anything that's sent to the group comes to their
Okay.
email, and it has the group name at the bracket, or they can do Do we have it in my groups, or is it just groups.johnmarshall? They can go groups.johnmarshall.edu, ask for the login and password, and they'll get the list of groups that they belong to. And then they can search and, to join other groups, but they're only getting groups that they have, availability to.
And I guess Gmail will filter those, so you can set up a filter or a rule,
Yes.
whatever its terminology is, and
Yep.
say, here, stick those in this folder, and
Correct.
when you have the chance, you can
Correct.
filter them.
Since moving to Google Apps, would you say your students, they all use Outlook client? They don't use it on OWA anymore?
The majority of them have it forwarded to a device. That's what we.
Yeah, majority of students are either using the web client, for us it's mymail.johnmarshall.edu, which points you at a Google server, or they have it to their phone. And I don't know of any students that are using an Outlook client.
But faculty and staff.
Faculty, yes.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I got two questions. If somebody deletes an email and then purges that, I mean, is there like an extra fee for any kind of backup place for faculty and staff specifically?
Yes. And we'll get into that in the
We'll
next
get that
session.
when we do third
Okay,
party.
and my
Yeah.
second question is, we get a lot of name change requests, and so if you
Oh,
have a
they're
name
easy.
change,
They're very easy.
they're really easy. You don't
Easy.
have to create a whole new account.
Nope.
You can move it.
Nope,
Okay.
I can actually take your account name and say that she changed her name, and what it does is it takes your existing account and makes it a nickname of your new account.
Okay.
So it just changes the way you log in and your default name, but it adds a nickname. The cool thing is you can have, I think, there's like 30 nicknames per user account that you can have. So not that students would do that, but for us, it's like admin, email at John Marshall, ICD, whatever. We can do all those.
Okay.
And it's the equivalent of what is in exchange
An alias.
alias. So it's, yeah.
Let's see, Google counterparts for exchange. What were you gonna- pretty
Yeah,
much
share
covered that.
calendars and,
Complaints through staff and faculty and students. Of course, there's complaints.
Yeah, but the main
It
one was,
doesn't
of course,
read my mail
yeah.
to me. It doesn't, it lets my brother-in-law send me mail.
Doesn't do my
It
taxes.
just,
Doesn't do my taxes.
yeah, it doesn't.
A lot of complaints, were there?
I mean, and the recurring ones were, of course, the nested messages and.
And it was just I don't like that it doesn't do
The web,
everything that
yeah.
Outlook does. So,
And there's
but you can
actually-
use Outlook.
There's actually a list of things that Outlook on Exchange does versus Outlook on the Google Apps does. And the send on receipt, that was a big complaint.
Yeah,
Google
there's
Apps
no
does
send
that.
receipts.
There's
There's
no
no
send
read
receipts.
receipts in Gmail.
Yeah. As of
So-
now.
And I tell people all the time, sending a read receipt is, because I get on Exchange, if you send me a read receipt, I have the option of telling you that I read it. And I say no to all those. Because it's, yeah, I read the message, so you send it to me, I read it. Don't worry about whether or when I read it, just know that you sent it to me.
So oddly enough, those are the two prevailing complaints.
Yeah, the only other thing was the notes.
Yeah, no.
Notes don't exist in Gmail at all. But I say to people, if you're going to create a note, just open up a document and put your notes in. I went to one staff member, our admissions, and she's got notes, like a ton of notes. And I'm like, okay, are they of importance? No. It's, the phone number for the pizza place that delivers to the law school. Just make it a contact. There's no reason for it to be a note. It's just a different way of handling the information that you have. But yeah, those were our primary complaints. And those was really no big deal because not a lot of people use notes. It was I don't see a red flag in Gmail, you have a star.
Is it easy to give someone else permissions to a mailbox?
Not in the education yet.
Not yet.
There's, in the Premier Edition, and Premier Edition, the difference between education and Premier, other than the fact that it's free versus $50 a user, when you pay $50 a user per year, you get a 25 gig mailbox, you get email delegation, and there's a couple other minor things that are different. Email delegation is on the list to be added to the education version, but really the education version is free Gmail with your domain.
7
Are they given a time frame yet for the delegation?
No, it's just listed as
to be added.
to be there.
So, if there's no way to point it live back to my own LDAP server though. You have to sync it on a nightly basis or a daily basis or an hourly basis to a server.
I think it's alive.
You can do it
Once you set the connector.
So every contact having their username and password in, it's making a live hit into the LDAP server, on the LDAP server.
All right. Some of the tools and one that's not listed is Outlook Sync. Outlook Sync gives you the option to have a global address list. The only thing with that particular product, it doesn't show groups or distribution lists, what people remember as distribution lists. But there is a product that currently is free that we found, and most of those products are found on Google Apps Marketplace. And it's actually the last one called Sherpa Tools. And currently it's free for educational institutions. One of the components in here allows, it somehow integrates with the API and it generates a distribution list including your groups. So essentially it's the exact same as a global address list. So this is something that we found. They're actually in Atlanta and like right down the street from us, so we didn't even know it. But this is a time saver for those who aren't coders. Some of the API hooks that are in here have a GUI, and they're currently adding stuff to it. Right now it's free, but I don't think they have the intentions of not making it free, but that could change. But yeah, you can go to GAM.
Okay, GAM was the first one that I found that I used. GAM is the Google Apps Manager, written by a guy in Philly who works for the I think it's the Philadelphia Biblical College. And basically what he did was, again, he went through the API for email, and he created GAM, which allows you to command line. You know, you just open up, it's actually, you save it to a directory, you go into that directory through, you know, a command line in Windows, and you just type GAM and you give it a set of, you know, criteria. So I can say GAM, update user, nickname, blah, and it does it. I don't have to worry about going to Google Apps and setting a nickname. That's a simple one. But what I can do is I can set GAM to read a file that I have, and every person in that file, add them to the sales group or add them to another, you know, to a, you know, true mail group. So GAM I found extremely helpful. And I have a bunch of scripts that I have my basic template that I use, and I just run it, you know, from the command line. I think he also wrote Gale, which is the Google Apps something login. I forget what the I stands for. And we haven't been able to get Gale to work yet, and it's kind of one of those things we fiddle with it for a little bit, and we'll get to it later. So it's still sitting on the back burner. But with Gale, you can log in as another user if you have the admin account. Okay, so what I would do is I would do, and I don't remember the syntax directly, but I think like in the user field, it would be admin ID plus user ID, admin's password, and I log in directly to his mailbox. So I don't have to have a student's email address or, you know, have their password or anything like that if I have to go into their account to do anything. You know, if we need to, you know, the dean wants to see when he sent a particular message, you can do it that way. Shared contacts.
Shared contacts is one of those things in the to be added list. Natively, it isn't a part of Google Apps. You can't share your contacts with anybody. But this is something that we found in the marketplace is relatively inexpensive. What, $100 a year for everybody?
Yeah, I think it was
for the
entire domain.
Yeah, for the entire domain. So I mean, there are utilities in the marketplace that there are some that are free and there's some that you would have to pay for. But essentially, most of the information, most of the available apps here or add-ons here can integrate with your domain. I actually demoed another product that does what Sherpa Tools does and Shared Contacts does in one. So essentially, you can go in Share Contacts. You can also log in as a user. So there are a myriad of available things in the marketplace. So that's a good place to start some books. Oh. To address your question, the backup solution that we use for this is Postini. And you can use Postini for your existing Exchange server, an email server. It's an offsite backup of your mail structure. And I think they only offer two, a 1-year agreement, 1-year contract, or a 10-year contract. I know it's a big jump, but that's the only thing that they offer for educational institutions. But I mean, the discovery it's very nice. It can go back a year. It has a very easy to navigate console. It gives you the option of pulling a mailbox before deletion, pulling it into PST so you can have the local. So it's a pretty nice tool.
What do you get out of the box as far as recovery? Is there much available just through Google Apps itself? I mean, do you have any layers of protection in the event of needing to restore mail or messages?
Just mainly posting.
Okay.
Yeah, out of the box, the theory, and if you have a Gmail account, the theory is with 7 gig, you shouldn't have to delete mail.
Sure.
When you delete it, it goes into the trash. The trash folder is hidden. You actually have to, click for that folder to see your trash. Most people don't they don't empty their trash.
With the 7 gigs?
It will start deleting it after 30 days.
With the 7 gigs, does that include like any Google Docs and spreadsheets?
Yeah, your
and stuff?
documents will hold. I think you can have a gig of documents.
Yeah, because they say it's like something like 5,000.
Yeah, it's a ton. And basically everything that they add to Gmail. So when if you look into your Gmail account, you'll see the little ticker that it's adding. This space is added into your education account at the same time.
Okay.
So you don't even have to request it. And the great thing, like we said, when you request your accounts, what we did was my pilot account was 50 users. My first account request for the Gmail account was 2,000 users. If I need another 1,000 users, I just send them an email saying I need 1,000 users. They have it. But like we said, there are a couple steps that you have to do to show that you are an educational institution. When you get in and you start looking through the Education Administrative Circle, which is their forum of information, what you'll see is out of the first 50 messages, 30 of them are like, well, why hasn't my account been moved yet? Because what happened was people were using the free account and then moving, the free apps account and moving it to an education account. We went the other way. We just went straight at education. We'll wait the 3 or 4 days, whatever it took for them to authorize our account, and that was it.
Did you say after 30 days, it disappears from your trash?
It starts to enter your trash. The oldest messages go first.
We have a system, Central IT runs the customized mail server. I think according to the Canadian law, you might have to keep the data for 5 years. So if there are code challenges or something like that, you can always go back and get it back from the tapes or servers.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that kind of request here?
With Postini, as I mentioned, you can create your own offline backup of what Postini has saved. So if you want to pull all of the domain mailboxes down to a local server, you can do that and back it up on your local tape drive or SAN, whatever you have. So
are you doing that now?
We aren't. We really don't have a need to do that so far since Postini has a year's time of backup. We haven't had a need to do that thus far. If it does arise, we have the option to do that.
How do you spell that?
Postini, Postini. Yes, sir.
What's Google tell you about their own disaster recovery?
It's listed in the long legal document.
It's listed in the long legal document, and the actual word is that they've never lost data. And that's actually on one of my slides from my training, and I point out that I know you're all lawyers, but that word I would never use instead about data. Yeah. But yeah, because of the redundancy and the amount of servers that they have and everything is spread, across multiple servers.
Yeah.
Before moving to Google Apps, did you guys evaluate Microsoft Live EDU? They seem to be competing free services.
We did, and as I mentioned, we went with the experience. More educational institutions are on this than Microsoft Live. We thought about Microsoft Live because of the integration with Active Directory and authentication. That would be a lot easier. One thing that we're going to, as a side note, one thing that we're going to look at is single sign-on to address the lack of connection that we do have with that. Sure. But yeah, we geared with the experience. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but $50 option with Google, you get Postini.
Oh, okay. For the
Premier Professional. With the Professional,
okay.
Yeah.
So you get the discovery.
But that is for 1 year.
What's that?
Is that
yeah, it's 1 year.
$50 per user per year.
Yeah. And then, like you said, that's the price of the account. You get Postini on it.
With the email for life, and I know there's some kind of price structure for how much you're paying per user. What
No, it's free.
Oh, it is free?
Yeah, for Google Apps, it's free.
Google Apps Education is free.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I
Because I was
think,
wondering how you were gonna pay for all of your alumni.
Like I said, it's free. All I have to do is, look through and determine I need another 800 accounts, and I send a request in, and I think it's within 3 days they add the accounts to mine.
So you guys are saving the whole cost of your email solution.
Yep, because I think that might be the last slide about what we do with our Exchange server.
but I think ASU has.
Arizona State did 65,000 users, their entire student body.
Plus alumni.
Plus alumni.
Did you say Alumni also doesn't have ads on their accounts?
They don't have.
Yeah, the ads in your account, if you have a Gmail account, you know that you have advertisements down the right-hand side. Because of educational institutions, and really when they started with the educational product, it was for K-12. Well, K-12, you can't leave ads open because, if you get adult-rated ads, you don't want students clicking them. So the first thing that you can do is you can click the box to turn off the ads, which was the first thing I did. The second thing I did was I found out that I can run a GAM script and turn web clips off for everybody, so there's no web clips across the top of my screen. The funny thing about web clips is I've never really paid much attention to them in Gmail until I started looking at this for education. You can write your own RSS feed to feed your web clips.
So that's what you have to go in and turn off?
Yeah.
So I was just logging in, I was just going to log in.
Yeah,
because I think I
if you go into your settings, you can turn them on. Okay. Yeah, and you can go back and turn them on if you want them on. We don't make people.
Is it per user or is the admin?
Per user. You can turn them on or off if you, whichever way you guys have. The other thing that I like about GAM is that we wrote a script. All of our email signatures are the same. So nobody has 15 initials after their name. It went.
The book stays.
Came from the upper level. We want name, title, school's address, email address, phone number, fax number. The only people that have anything different than that is admissions, because they have extra numbers for the admissions office.
And you can write exceptions for those who do need.
You can write it in the script. So basically, every night the script runs to rewrite everybody's signature. So you can change it in the morning if you want to. Tomorrow it's going to get changed back to the default that we wrote. So it helps because, there are people whose signature is this long. To send a message like, yeah, I'll be at your meeting,
In pink.
Oh,
yeah.
And one last thing, we'll take questions. The last thing that we have, what do you do at the end of exchange? When it's complete, all those attempting, don't throw it in the dumpster, don't use it as target practice, don't do any of that. Of course, until you have to remove it from the domain. And we know how integrated exchange is with AD. Just follow the steps and get rid of it. And then you can do, which is what we plan.
And we do have a 9-story building. So.
Yeah. All right, any questions?
Take the beauty of that.
Yes, the back would be nice. Office space.
The ads again, that's, you're able to remove them from your alumni accounts?
Yeah, because they fall under our domain. So I can turn the ads off for everybody in my domain.
But,
One box. Go.
I mean, I work with case law school, a larger university. We're in the process of moving all the students to Gmail. But in our agreement, it specifically says that we're only licensed to have the ad-free version while they're current students. And once they graduate, we have to.
Do you give them an alumni? Do you add the alumni subdomain to it?
No.
Because we read it's off. All my accounts is off.
We have the similar thing at our university, and my understanding was it was 2 separate domains, even though it's the same.
They say that you can have 2 separate domains. We didn't want to do the subdomain for alumni.
But you have to wonder what would be the business model if all the alumni and all the students never had ads.
It's the preference of how many of them are already using Gmail, and how many will look at it, the company that they go to work for, and buy the Premier Edition.
Just a comment, somebody presented last year or the year before. They said the same thing, like the trade-off is they're giving free accounts to the current students, so the business model is to make money and send ads to the alumni. Somebody presented, I don't know, like at CALI last year or the year before. So I was surprised when you said you don't have ads for anyone, including alumni.
In fact, the matter is
the same with us too. After they graduate, they gonna get
we cannot turn off the advertising. They said they control the account. We don't control it.
That's interesting.
Go back and read through the documentation. As we mentioned, a lot of things change, including coding and the features that they add over the years. So I'm not sure if you were contacted when that was changed or what your agreement is when you added Google Apps. But yeah, look through your legal agreement. Yes, sir.
I want to go back to the very first part where you talked about how the faculty accepted the change. Was there any pushback at all from your faculty over the privacy issue?
Not really, just the main issue that we mentioned. There wasn't really a huge concern about that. But, yes, sir.
I'm just looking online quickly, and what it sounds like is as long as the domain isn't composed entirely of alumni records, you don't have to enable ads.
And that's what we don't have.
That's what
Yeah, we don't have.
Yeah, because a lot of places you go ahead and get the alumni.johnmarshall.edu address. We didn't do that. They just keep their John Marshall address.
Yeah. And it's something that the dean wanted. If there are no more questions, we'll be up here, and thank you guys for we just literally went on the website, requested it, got back in 30 days.
Thousands of people. Why do you and there you go. Sooner or later, some of us.
You don't think that ever will change? I don't think you
I don't think so. And I think they come up with something on that. As of now, it's ours. That's when.
That happens
Well, they usually are cameras. We got handheld Zoom cameras now going. Yeah, turn them around. But you know, it's yeah.
If you think you're forcing us, you think John on this now.
I never
well, he said this was honor code violation. You're out of here, punk.